Rivers and streams are basically like the lifeblood. They're like the beating veins of human history. They're incredibly important and valuable.
We're here today at a restored riverside. One of the really cool things about working on rivers is you're connected with all that land and what's happening upstream, and that all feeds in. What's happening on the land feeds into the rivers. Quite literally, nutrients and sediment run off into the waters, but then also all sorts of stuff moves back up our rivers. We think about fish moving upstream and the way that animals use these river corridors to move. And so really, these rivers, they're what connects all of the water and all of the land.
Long Island Sound is an incredibly important estuary. This estuary basically allows a ton of different species to feed, breed, raise their young, and provide a protective environment for themselves. In Long Island Sound, like in Connecticut for instance, it is basically the gateway to the rest of the freshwater environments in much of New England and the Northeast.
Our landscape is largely formed by glaciers and rivers. They've provided migratory pathways for animals and people, and putting dams on them is like just putting a door in the middle of a hallway and nailing it shut.
When dams were built, we didn't give a lot of thought to the impacts that we were having downstream and how that would impact our communities and the health of these waterways. While there may be thousands of dams across Long Island Sound, the number of road stream crossings is even greater. And when culverts were put in place and bridges were put in place, really the goal was to move traffic over the river. And we weren't thinking about moving the water underneath the river except to make sure that the road was safe.
Culverts are pieces of human infrastructure that transport water underneath a road most of the time. We want our roads to stay dry. And what can happen, especially if the culverts are too small or they're creating kind of a skew with the stream where we are exacerbating erosion issues, they can lead to upstream and downstream flooding. And then in an emergency, you could also have culverts effectively wash out, where the pressure of the water and the power of the stream essentially rips the pipe up and out of the road, and then you have a disconnected road.
There are over 20,000 dams across New England. Many of those were originally built for often small hydropower to power mills. They started as maybe mills to grind grain into flour, that we might have needed water supply either for drinking or sometimes dams were built as farm pond dams. Particularly in our more urban centers, a lot of the dams were converted to factories and mills, so paper mills, textile mills. They have been there for really that long. They were an important part of the history that allowed our communities to grow and to prosper. But those dams, especially the older ones that haven't been maintained, they continue to have impacts on our fisheries. They impact water quality. Overall, they really limit the ability of our rivers to be healthy. And so in places where we don't need these dams anymore, it's important that we consider removing them, because as these dams age, they also become public safety hazards.
The Naugatuck River, we're looking at really restoring the entire system. The flow you're looking at right now in this river is just a snapshot in time. We have big storms and big floods, we'd be underwater right where I'm standing right now. And it would be part of the river too. I'm basically standing in the river. And then in a drought, you'd see a lot less flow in here, a lot more rocks, a lot more maybe riffles in the system. So when you look at that over time in a river, it's called a hydrograph. And when you look over it over a whole year, it looks a lot like a pulse, just like a pulse in your own system. And we check those hydrographs and we try to restore that natural hydrograph to keep a river healthy. Because all those different stages of a river, high flow, low flow, all serve purposes, critical ecological health purposes for the river. Back in the 1990s, we removed 5 dams from the Naugatuck River, and that was the beginning of it. But what remained was the largest and most significant dam, because it's the first dam on the system, the most downstream dam, is still blocking the system. The dams we were looking at on the Naugatuck weren't flood control dams, they were old industrial dams. Actually, during the historic 1955 floods on the Naugatuck River, these dams made it worse.
Dana Dam was built in the early 40s as a recreational feature. It was a river converted to a pond, or what we call an impoundment, built to create a swimming and fishing and ice skating site. So one of the biggest benefits of this project and a lot of the projects we pursue for dam removal and connectivity restoration is fish and other aquatic organism passage. So it doesn't seem like a large dam, but most species of fish in our region can't get past this structure.
It's pretty exciting to get to come to a site that I haven't been to this site in several years, and you get to see the river, how it's changed, how it continues to grow, and how it continues to restore itself. So we think about shad, we think about river herring, both blueback herring and alewife, our native sea lamprey, as well as our American eel. They need to move up into these river systems in order to spawn and for that next generation to grow. And so they need this upstream habitat in order to have healthy populations out in the ocean. And that's really important for our commercial fisheries, both because people like to fish for shad and striped bass, but also because some of these species, river herring, are frequently used as bait fish for other larger fish.
We need massive amounts of forage fish out there because they basically take that sunlight energy and transfer it up the food chain from fish, birds, marine mammals, sea turtle, all that stuff. That's how we get all the food on our plates from the supermarket. If you want to buy fish, you got to get it from a commercial fisherman. These forage fish create the basis for all that.
When they move upstream, often those fish also serve as food for inland species. There's other animals that feed on these species, and so they bring and they support those animals upstream as well.
There is a dam on the Blind Brook. It's actually the very first artificial barrier that a migratory fish encounters, swimming up from Long Island Sound up into the fresher waters of the Blind Brook. It was an old legacy dam that was built and then kind of forgotten about and has been slowly falling apart ever since.
Dams are also super costly to maintain over time. So by taking a dam out, you're protecting the communities and the people around that dam. You're allowing the system to function more naturally, so water's flowing more freely. And you're reducing the cost to that community as well of maintaining the dam. So there's a lot of incredible harmonious benefits to both people and the environment when you reconnect streams, take out dams.
They block that flow of sediment and nutrients that would naturally move out to the ocean. So in some cases, we have areas where we're actually losing beaches, or we could be contributing really positive nutrients to an area. The most obvious impact is that fish cannot move upstream when there's a dam in the way.
There are over 5,000 dams in Connecticut. No one is looking to remove all dams. We're looking to selectively remove the dams that are no longer serving an economic purpose, and those that have such a high ecological impact that even if they do serve a small economic purpose, it's not enough to make up for their impacts. When you remove a dam, you not only restore all transparent fish passage, basically, all fish above and below can move both directions, but you're also restoring sediment transport and nutrient transport and all those self-sustaining processes of a river. you remove a dam, there's a big process involved in it, and it starts with the planning and feasibility phase. First of all, prioritizing and finding the right dams. In the case of the Kinneytown, the first barrier on the system to fish, absolutely critically important. And then feasibility. What are the critical issues? What are we going to have to address and manage during the removal of this dam? The second phase is design and permitting phase, and those two are interlinked. So you're really understanding the permitting in the system and the design needs and the constraints, and determining that you're managing the impacts, because there are impacts when you remove a dam too. So you have to manage these to reduce the impacts on the system, even though they're short-term impacts. Then we go into the construction phase, is the third phase. And then after the construction phase, we actually have a monitoring and adaptive management phase. And actually the monitoring even starts before the dam is removed, continues on after the dam is removed. And then adaptive management is basically looking at the system, seeing how it's responding, and see if it needs any help along the way.
So right at the time of removal, it's also sort of the very beginning of this new transformation of the river. So water draws down, sediments that are on the periphery will become exposed and a little bit drier, and then a channel will start to carve through some of those softer sediments and start to transport that sediment downstream. And then in a few weeks' time, what will occur is basically an eruption of greenery. The sediments that are in there have a seed bank in there, and there are tons of species that are just sort of elated at this change in conditions, and so they totally explode because they've got oxygen they never really had access to, they've got moisture, and they have nutrients in the soil.
What we're looking forward to with the removal of Dana Dam is anadromous fish moving upstream through Wilton for the first time in a few hundred years. When I was a kid, we'd come here and we'd sit on this abutment. So this is where we spent time, fishing down below the dam. Fishing in the dam impoundment was never that good. We found the further upstream we got from the dam, the better fishing was. But we even knew as children that this did not let the fish upstream. So this goes back to, coming back upriver, coming home to Wilton and Norwalk, and being able to come down here and see this, and see the dam go away. And next time I fish here, I'll be fishing right through this site.
So once the Dana Dam is removed, it would just be amazing for me to go above the dam site into the ripples that we're creating there and see some sea run fish go by. That would just be the most incredible thing.
So removing a dam is linked to climate resiliency. When we have large storm events, dams can breach. And those failures can cause impact to a lot of communities and other infrastructure. Removing a dam also creates resiliency by allowing for a connected system, by that working circulatory system. And now the aquatic organisms, the fish and other species in the river, can respond and adapt to changes in the system, both temperature changes and water quality changes that happen over time.
When you reconnect streams, take out dams, improve culverts, you're creating a much more harmonious environment that functions more correctly.
So when we have a culvert, most of the time we are essentially pinching the stream. We're making the stream more narrow, and that causes water to speed up. And then for our fish and wildlife who are trying to live in and amongst these streams and the stream banks, that water could be too fast or too shallow for a fish to successfully swim through. If I'm a fish and I'm swimming upstream and I encounter this culvert and it's perched up and out, a lot of our species here in the Northeast, they're not necessarily known for being terrific jumpers. How we at Save the Sound like to think about culvert right sizing is that we are encouraging culverts that are going to be built, and they're not just wide enough to accommodate the stream, but they're also involving those banks. So we're getting some of that stream to stream bank connection, that dry passage. And what that does is that essentially allows for the stream to behave like a stream, to essentially breathe and move like streams like to do. So I'm allowing for passage for my fish and for my wildlife, my turtles, my raccoons. But I'm also making sure that Water, sediment, trees, all these things that need to be transported by the stream, they're being transported. That not only is reconnecting habitat, but that also tends to make our structures more resilient, which means that they are more up to the challenge of climate change.
It's kind of neat that right behind us through the woods, we have a commuter rail line of people taking it down to Norwalk and perhaps into New York City. That's connectivity for people. Let's think about connectivity for these animals too. And let's think about how the value of connectivity and diversity, there's real value there.
The Long Island Sound River Restoration Network and its amazing collaborative of practitioners across New York, across Connecticut, that are all looking to restore free-flowing stream systems. They're looking to do that through education, outreach, through dam removals, through culvert improvements. And we're looking to kind of remove some of the barriers to removing barriers and try to improve the stream systems overall. We're bringing together a lot of local knowledge as well as scientific and regional expertise to try and accelerate the restoration of freshwater systems across the Long Island Sound region.
The Naugatuck River is a great example of restoration because it has been taking decades and a lot of partners to come together to do. It is a great example for what we can do in the Long Island Sound on many of our river systems. The Naugatuck River, once the Kinneytown Dam comes out, will be one of our longest uninterrupted sections of free-flowing river.
If a dam owner has a question about what they can do, where they can find resources, they can certainly get in touch with someone at the River Restoration Network to figure out what are some of the first steps that they can take and how can they learn more about dam removal and barrier removal in general. We also can point them towards funding that may be available to help them either with some of the planning and engineering or also with the construction itself. When there are projects that sort of meet these really high priority opportunities, a lot of nonprofits are able to actually help manage and support the dam removal project itself. So we may be able to actually actively do the fundraising, manage the project, and work directly with that dam owner, either private or a town or a city, to actually move that project forward.
This will be my first dam removal project that I've worked on to fruition, so that's really exciting.
I started working on dam removal in the 1990s on this river system.
So I've been doing this work in rivers for over 20 years. What I think is novel is we've come together to develop an action plan, to think about what do we think the biggest challenges are and how do we think we can collectively solve them together? Because we need to move faster and we need to move more efficiently. And we need to figure out how do we get this work done so that we can really maximize the benefits and so that we can see those kinds of fish returning, we can see the improvements in the water quality in the time scales that the fish and wildlife need, but also that we need. We need healthier rivers and we need them now. We need them yesterday. We need safer bridges and roads. And again, we need those now.
Having a healthy watershed and having a healthy Long Island Sound, you cannot separate them. They're intertwined. You can't really have one without the other.